something needs to be understood and something needs to be known. And that's where the comes from. Now, very point blank is the first thing I want to say to you is welcome, and welcome to the department, and welcome to the college. Welcome to the Department of English. Welcome to a new academic year, a fresh year of mission, vision, and comprehension. And perhaps more important, or rather most important, welcome to the strange and occasionally bewildering experience of discovering that the subject you thought was about books, about characters, is actually about everything else. And in all probability, when you spoke to people that you were going to take English as a major, what we used to call as honors, a couple of days before. Now some of them might have probably asked you a very practical question in today's class. And the question, at times a very embarrassing question, one is, and what will you do with English? Perhaps some of you have already come across such an experience. And it's a remarkably persistent question that I believe in today's time. And people tend to believe that there is nothing outside the STEM: science, technology, engineering, and management. What will you do with Shakespeare? What will you do with poetry? What will you do with novels written by people who have been dead for 200 years? And what probably can these things be of any use? And what for are you going to spend an entire afternoon arguing about the sentence and the grammar of a text? And I suspect that some of you, or some of your well-meaning relatives, have already begun calculating your future employment prospects with the solemnity of a government contract. Because people are so calculating these days. The only thing that I have to say is that I have some sympathy for them and nothing else, not more. After all, literature does not come with an instructions manual about life, saying that study this poem or text, and upon successful completion, you will receive what we always pray for, a government job. And unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. But what I want to suggest is that you have not come here merely to acquire information about literature. You have not come here to listen and learn to something more, something that is much more difficult. What you have come to is to learn how to see, listen, and observe, and to think, which is, I believe, a much more serious faculty of the mind. Now, let me begin with a confession. I cannot remember the first book I was assigned to read. I do not remember. I remember the books I was supposed to read. If you visit my house, you will find innumerable books, and a couple of them are still unread. That is the tragedy of readers. I remember books whose names appeared on reading lists, books whose pages I turned with a pencil in my hand because somebody had told me that important things were likely to happen between paragraph 3 and 7. This was I was suggested at the very beginning of the day. But the first book that truly mattered to me is not memorable because it was assigned to me to read. It is memorable because I found something of myself in it. And such a distinction obviously matters. Because there is a difference between reading a book and being read by a book. Because the first is activity. The second is an experience. We often imagine that when we open a novel, we are the ones who are doing the interpretation. We look at the characters, we look at their lives, we look at their predicaments, we judge their choices, we decide who is sympathetic and who is not, who is reprehensible, who is not. But occasionally a book turns the gaze around. It asks us, why did you dislike a character? Why did you sympathize with a particular character or situation or event? Why did that scene or a particular scene make you uncomfortable? Why did you laugh there? Why did you cry there? Why did you remain silent? And suddenly, the object of study is no longer merely the book, it's you. And this is precisely the reason that literature can be so dangerous. And when I say dangerous, I wish you to take it as a compliment. Now, then the question is, why are you here? You are beginning your first semester. You are probably expecting me to give you some advice. I believe I should. And a few basic things that I should not miss is that attend your lectures, read your tests, submit your assignments. Don't wait until the 9th 4-year examination to discover that Paradise Lost is rather a longish poem than you expected. These are all obviously excellent suggestions, but they are not what I really want you to get. What I want you to ask is, why are you here? Not why you chose this college, not why you filled out the forms, not why English appeared as your preferred subject. Rather, I mean something deeper. What is literature? And why you chose literature? Because in this department, though we are going to teach you language, it's primarily literature. Why should a young person in the 21st century spend 4 years reading poems, plays, novels, essays, and theories, where the world around us is moving at an extraordinary speed? We live in a world of instant communication, a world in which a thought can travel around the planet before its authors has had time to even reconsider it. A world of artificial intelligence, algorithms, short videos, podcasts, streaming platforms, and information arriving faster than we can even grasp or digest it. And yet, strangely enough, I think literature has become more important than before. Because information tells us what has happened. Literature asks, what did it feel like? History can tell us that a war occurred. A statistics can tell us how many people died. A political document can tell us what governments decided. But a novel can place one human being in front of us and say, look at the person. Stay here. Do not scroll away. Do not reduce this person to a statistic. Listen. And that is a very different kind of knowledge we experience on a daily basis in this world of same culture. There is another thing I want to give you permission rather to do during your time that you're going to spend here. I want you to know, this might sound very strange, perplexing, but it's important. You have come to the college to learn, but education does not mean replaying all your questions with answers. It doesn't mean replacing your questions with answers either. Sometimes education means acquiring better questions and to learn how to ask questions. You will encounter theories that initially make very little sense. You will read a critic and think, what on earth is this person talking about? We will encounter words like structuralism, post-colonialism, feminism, Marxism, psychoanalysis, eco-criticism, deconstruction, narratology, and perhaps many other innumerable theoretical terms that seem to have been invented specifically to make undergraduate students pretty nervous. My suggestion would be not to panic. Theory is not a secret language designed to keep you outside a locked door, remember. At its best, theory is simply a way of asking, what am I seeing? So, take something as apparently simple as beauty. A poem may tell us that something is beautiful, but literary theory teaches us to ask, who decides what beauty is? Who has historically been allowed to define it? What difference or what happens to people who do not fit that definition? Who is represented? Who is absent? Who is speaking? Who is being spoken about? Who has the opportunity to tell the story? And questions as such. And suddenly, the poem has become larger than the poem itself. It has become a conversation about gender, class, race, caste, colonialism, power, history, and identity. And that is what, rather, theory does to the text. It teaches you to look again. Now, having said that, I would like to offer you, or rather advise you, with a tone of warning. Be suspicious answers, because in today's time, we are too complex to look for easy answers. That is very disastrous, I think. Be suspicious of any easy answers. Literature, you must believe, is full of complicated things. That is one of the reasons I trust it. Consider Shakespeare, for example. Hamlet is intelligent, but intelligence does not make him wise. Macbeth is ambitious, but ambition does not make him entirely evil. King Lear is powerful, but power does not make him capable of seeing clearly. The characters we encounter in great literature are rather simply good or bad. They are contradictory. They are capable of tremendous actions. Their tenderness and cruelty at times compel us, often move us. Courage and cowardice, jealousy and selflessness, selfishness again, they are sinful laws. They are universal, and that is precisely what literature can teach us something that moral scholars cannot. It teaches us that human beings are difficult to reduce. Many of you will study post-colonial literature, I believe. You will read writers who challenge the stories that colonialism told about Africa, Asia, and the so-called natives in these countries. We will encounter authors like Chima Achebe. We will encounter authors like Rumi Wakionku. You will encounter writers who ask a fundamental question: who gets to tell the story? That question is not merely literary. It is a political question. It is an ethical question. And it is deeply a personal question. Because each of us is vulnerable to the dangers of a single story. Someone tells you that your village is backward. Someone tells you that a particular community is primitive. Someone tells you that tribal culture belongs to the past. Someone tells you that English is superior to your mother tongue. Someone tells you that literature is useless. Someone tells you that science is the only real knowledge. Someone tells you that a person is poor because they are lazy. Someone tells you that a woman is emotional, a man is strong, a rural person is ignorant, and an urban person is sophisticated. And if the story is repeated often enough, we begin to mistake repetition for truth. Now what literature does is that it interrupts that process. It interrogates that process. It says, wait, there is another story, perhaps another, and then another, until the world becomes too complicated to fit comfortably inside our prejudices. That is one of literature's great or greatest gifts, because it provokes you to look inward, to subvert the narrative. And now, I want to bring this discussion closer to where we are. You are studying here in Simdega, and I tell you that this matters. You are not studying literature in an abstract location. You are studying literature in a place with its own histories, memories, languages, communities, and struggles. Your classroom is situated in Jharkhand, and therefore, your relationship with literature can never be completely separated from questions of the land, identity, pride, language, displacement, development, memory, and belonging. You may read Shakespeare, you may read Wordsworth, you may read Virginia Woolf, Tom Morrison, Chinua Achebe, Salman Rushdie, but eventually the question will return to you. What does all this have to do with where I come from? And that is a question, or rather a very good question, a question that everybody from this place should ask. Do not be afraid to ask it. In fact, I want you to ask it repeatedly, because the study of English literature should not make you strangers in your own land. It should make you more attentive to it, rather. One of the first things you will discover in English major is that language is not merely a tool for communication. Language carries history, language carries power, it carries memory, and sometimes language carries violence also. Consider the word civilization. Who has historically been called civilized? And who has been described as uncivilized? Consider the word development. Development for whom? At what cost? Consider the word modern. What does it mean to call one society modern and the other traditional? Words may look innocent, but they are not innocent either. This is why English literature is not simply the study of beautiful language. It is also about a study of who gets to name the word. And if you become sensitive to that, you will begin to notice things everywhere. In advertisements, in political speeches, in films, in social media, in textbooks, in conversations, and even in the world we are casually inhabiting on an everyday basis. I hope that your classroom will become a place where you can disagree. You can agree to disagree. Not rudely, not carelessly, but seriously. I do not want you to leave college having learned how to repeat what your teachers believe. I want you to leave having learned how to argue with your teachers intelligently, rationally. If you disagree with an interpretation, say so, but bring evidence. If you dislike a character, explain why. If a poem seems meaningless, tell us what makes it meaningless. If a theory seems absurd, challenge it, but read it first. There is an enormous difference between I do not agree and I do not agree, and there is why. The second sentence is the beginning of scholarship. In the process of acquiring the scholarship, remember that you will steal faith. You may steal faith. And I can promise you that some of you are going to fail. You will write an essay that you believe is brilliant and receive a mark that suggests otherwise. You will misinterpret a poem. You will forget an important quotation. You will give a presentation and realize halfway through that your carefully prepared conclusion has mysteriously disappeared from your memory. You will sit for an examination and suddenly discover that the one question you prepared least is the one question occupying the largest number of marks in your question paper. This happened with us, and this is going to happen with you also. It will happen with everybody there. And when it does, do not conclude that you are incapable of studying literature. Failure is not a verdict of your intelligence, remember. Sometimes it is simply information. It tells you or suggests you that read more, think more carefully, write more clearly, ask better questions, and try again. One of the great mistakes students make is to confuse the poor performance with the permanent identity. I did it badly becomes I am bad at it. Those are not the same sentence. So learn the difference between what is said and what is understood and what is implied. Learn the difference. And having said that, let me be careful here. Failure is not automatically noble. Remember, we say that failures are the stepping stones to success, obviously. But it should not be romanticized either. There is nothing particularly beautiful about poverty, humiliation, exclusion, or suffering. And there is no wisdom in failing when preparation could have prevented it. The lesson is not that failure doesn't matter. The lesson is failure does not have to have the final word. It cannot have the power, or rather it should not empower it to bog you down. Accept that you will make mistakes. Learn from them. You will be rejected. Begin again. You will sometimes discover that the path you imagine for yourself is not the path you actually want. And that discovery too can be a form of education either. But if failing is one thing, I want you to understand, to comprehend it. Imagination is another. And for English students, imagination is not an obstacle or optional extra. It is central to what you are doing. We often think imagination means inventing things. A story, a poem, a fantasy, a fictional world. But remember, imagination is much more demanding than that. To encounter a person whose life is unlikely or unlike yours and ask what it means to be that person, this is why literature matters. You will never be a 19th century English woman. You will never be an African soldier in a post-colonial novel. You may never be a king. You may never be an immigrant. You may never be a prisoner. You may never be a refugee. You may never lead to a family, a war, a partition, a revolution, or an ecological catastrophe. But literature can ask you to spend several hours inside the consciousness of someone who has, that is not escape from reality. It is the way of expanding reality. But there is something more important here that I should refer. To understand a character is not necessarily to approve of that character. You can understand Macbeth without defending murder. You can understand Herbert without excusing him. You can understand a colonial mentality without accepting colonialism. You can understand someone whose political beliefs you despise without adopting them. This is an important intellectual distinction that you should always understand. Empathy is not agreement. Empathy is the willingness to ask, how did this person become capable of thinking this way? That question can be uncomfortable. It should be, because education is not always about becoming comfortable. Sometimes it is about becoming capable of remaining in a room without complexity. Now, in the middle of all these theoretical suggestions, which might appear to be at times very abstract, let me give you a practical advice. Read your syllabus, obviously, but do not stop there. Your syllabus is a map, remember, a cartography. It is not the entire country. If you are reading Shakespeare, read something contemporary alongside. If you are reading British literature, read Indian literature too. If you are reading African literature, read Dalit literature too. Read tribal literature also. If you are reading canonical literature, ask what has been excluded from the canon. read poetry, read novels, read criticism, read newspapers, read essays, read something you disagree with, and occasionally read something completely useless. Useless, and I say that deliberately. Read a novel simply because you enjoy it. Read a poem because you like the sound of it. Read a story because it makes you proud. Not every book has to improve your CV. Sometimes the book is allowed simply to make your life larger. And there is another question or rather another skill I want you to take especially seriously, and that is writing. You live in a world in which almost everyone has an opinion. That is not particularly difficult. The difficult thing is to have an opinion and to express it clearly. Learn to write a sentence. Learn to write a paragraph. Learn to construct an argument. Do not hide weak thinking behind complicated vocabulary. A long sentence is not necessarily an intelligent sentence. Remember that. A difficult word is not necessarily an impressive word. Clarity is not simplicity. Clarity is often discipline. If you can explain the complicated idea in language that another person can understand, you have understood something. If you can only make an idea sound complicated, you may not have understood it yet. And there is another challenge waiting for you, and that is your attention. Many of you don't have. You live in a world that is constantly competing for you. Every notification says, look at me. Every advertisement says, look at me. Everything social media platform says, stay here. Literature asks something else. It says, stay. Stay with this sentence. Stay with this paragraph. And this staying or sticking where you are reading is a rare ability. And therefore, it has become a valuable one. The ability to concentrate may become one of the great intellectual advantages of our generation. So read slowly at times. Put the phone away. Sit with a poem that you do not understand. Read the paragraph again. Underline something. Write a question in the morning. Allow yourself to be bored for a little while. Boredom is occasionally the front door through which thought enters. At the end of the degree, I do not want you to merely say that I studied Shakespeare. I want you to be able to say, Shakespeare taught me to think about power. I do not want you merely to say, I studied achieving. I want you to say, achieving when we think about who has the opportunity to tell the history. I do not want you to merely to say, I studied eco-criticism. I want you to begin looking at a river, a forest, a nature, a tranquility, a field, or even a city, and ask what kinds of human stories are embedded in that landscape. That is the difference between studying literature and being educated by literature. So, as you begin this journey, let me leave you with 5 things. First, read. Read widely. Read beyond your comfort zone. Read authors whose lives are unlikely yours. Read authors whose ideas irritate you. Read books that do not immediately reveal themselves. Second, question. Do not accept every interpretation simply because it appears in a textbook. The textbook is not a scripture. The critic is not infallible. And your teacher is certainly not. Question respectfully. Third, listen. You will discover that another student has noticed something you missed. That is not a threat, that is education. Fourth, write. Write regularly. Write badly if necessary, but write. The first draft does not have to be brilliant. It has to exist, and then only your better writings can match or appear. And finally, last but not the least, remain curious. This may be the most important thing in the present time. Do not let examination reduce literature to answers. Do not let grades reduce you to numbers. Do not let a career reduce education to employability. You are here to become a person capable of thinking. Now, perhaps by now, you are still wondering what literature will ultimately give you. I may not promise you a job. I cannot promise you a fame. I cannot promise that reading novels will make your life easier. In fact, it may make certain things harder. Once you learn to recognize injustice, it becomes difficult to pretend that you cannot see it. Once you learn how language constructs reality, it becomes difficult to listen to political rhetoric innocently. Once you begin understanding other people's stories, it becomes harder to dismiss them casually. Once you have learned to question authority, you may occasionally become inconvenient. But perhaps that is not such a bad thing, because the world does not always need to be more people who are convenient. Sometimes it needs people who can say, wait, why, who says so, whose voice is missing, what if there is another way of seeing this. Those are literally questions. Remember that. They are not democratic, they are also democratic questions. And let me finally return to where I began, to the first book that I experienced. I told you that sometimes we need to think we are reading a book, when in fact the book is reading us. I have come to believe that education works in much the same way. You think you are coming to college to study, but something else is happening. The books are studying you. The teachers are challenging you. Your classmates are surprising you. Your failures are teaching you. Your disagreements are teaching you. Your questions are changing. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, you are changing. That may be the real purpose of education. Not to fill the mind until there is no room left, but to make the mind larger. Larger enough to accommodate contradiction, larger enough to accommodate uncertainty, larger enough to accommodate another person's experience, larger enough to say, I may be wrong, to accept that you was on wrong foot, and then perhaps even more courageously tell me what I have not yet seen. So, to the students beginning semester 1 today, I want to say this, that you do not need to arrive here already knowing everything. You do not need to have read all the great books. You do not need to speak perfect English. You do not need to have already discovered who are going to become. You have time, you have need. What you need is curiosity. Bring us your questions. Bring us your experiences. Bring us your languages. Bring us your disagreements. Bring us the literature you already love. And bring us the books you have not yet learned to love. Because somewhere among all these pages, arguments, poems, characters, theories, and conversations, you may discover something unexpected. You may discover that literature is not simply about entering imaginary worlds. It is about returning to the real world with new eyes. And perhaps after 3 or rather 4 years of major, when you walk out of this college, you will discover that the most important thing English literature gave you was not a list of authors, readings, or examinations. It gave you a habit, the habit of looking again at a text, at a person, at a society, at a history, at yourself. And when you learn to look at it, you begin to see what you had previously overlooked. That I think is where education begins. So welcome to English literature, welcome to Shakespeare, and Archimedes, and Austin, and Old, and poetry, and theory, and answer, and mathematics. Welcome to books that will frustrate you, delight you, confuse you, and occasionally change you. Welcome to the privilege of not knowing and to the responsibility of finding out. And most of all, welcome to the difficult, beautiful, sometimes infuriating, and endlessly rewarding business of learning how to do. Thank you.